The mid-2000s were a great time for Star Wars games. Wait, haven't I done this bit before? The mid-2000s were a golden age for Star Wars fans. Anyway, today we will be talking about yet another mid-2000s Star Wars action game, and today's main course on the menu is The Force Unleashed. Originally released in 2008 for newer and older consoles of the time, it also got a subsequent 2009 PC release, subtitled Ultimate Sith Edition, and this is the version we'll be talking about today. But first, a bit of background on the whole thing. According to Wikipedia,
the free online encyclopedia that wasn't edit?
The idea for the game dates back as far as 2004, when a small group of 6 developers sat down and tried to envision a new Star Wars game. After literally 100 different concepts and story outlines, some of which included really interesting ideas, they settled on making a game about the events which took place between Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith and Episode 4 A New Hope. The team at LucasArts would then work together with George Lucas on fleshing out the story, setting, and the characters, but more on that later. As I already mentioned, the game was initially released in 2008 on consoles, with the PC release hitting the market in 2009. So let's get right into it. When you first launch the game, you realize that something is wrong. Something feels really off. Oh yeah, you can't use your mouse while in the main menu. You have to use the arrows on your keyboard. The options menu is also really barren. There are no graphical settings besides resolution, and a high detail box which you can tick or untick before you even start the damn thing. Okay, fine, whatever, let's just begin. The game opens up like any Star Wars title ever. You have the iconic title card, the iconic music and scrolling text. Unfortunately, I can't play any of the music because the big bad mouse doesn't like it when people decide to put a tiny crumb of Star Wars music in their shitty review videos. Anyway, the introductory cutscenes shows us an Imperial attack on Kashyyyk, where Darth Vader is searching for runaway Jedi. We see him force choke an Imperial officer as punishment for failure, which is a nice callback to the original movie.
I have no interest in your failures, Commander. I am here on a mission of my own.
You actually get to play as Vader for the prologue, which is also a really nice way to start off a Star Wars game. Okay guys, it's time to let the cat out of the bag. The PC port for The Force Unleashed is really bad. Where do I even begin? Using the arrow keys to traverse the menu was only the first red flag. As you can see here, right off the bat, the audio mixing is pretty awful. I can barely hear the background music and the various sound effects. The game is also capped at 30 FPS, however luckily, this is one of the few things you can fix. Download the fan-made patch which allows you to run the game at 60 FPS. 30 might have been okay on the PS3 back in the day, however, playing a 2008 game on PC in 2020 on 30 FPS, it's a no-no. You'll also have to fuck around with the volume settings if you want to actually hear anything. However, even then, the mixing is still pretty horrible. Over the course of the game, you'll also see a fair share of various graphical glitches, but unfortunately, these audiovisual hiccups will be the least of your worries. By far, the worst thing in The Force Unleashed is its god-awful camera control. Now, the actual control scheme for the PC is surprisingly fine, but we'll get to that in a minute, when we actually talk about the gameplay. Still, the way the camera behaves in this game is just horrible. There is no other way to put it. And it's a damn shame really, because underneath all this crap, There is actually a good game buried here. Before we begin, I would also like to talk about the presentation of this game. First of all, the art direction and art style, absolutely stunning. The Force Unleashed absolutely nails the Star Wars aesthetic through and through. Everything from the interior of various ships to the alien planets of Felucia and Kashyyyk, they absolutely scream Star Wars. However, the same cannot be said for its overall graphical quality. For starters, the amount of bloom in certain scenes is absolutely ridiculous. Though this really shouldn't come off as a surprise, these were the mid-2000s. Loads of games back then experimented heavily with bloom effects. The character models, animations, and texture work are on par for the time. This was originally a console game, so you really can't compare it with some other high-end titles of the time. Though various visual glitches can occur at certain instances, like texture pop-ups and the like, and like I already mentioned, there are no other settings besides a high detail checkbox and resolution. So, if you had a slower computer back in those days, well, fuck you then. As for the audio component, I already mentioned how the overall mixing is trash, and on a few instances I couldn't even hear the music in certain levels. I don't know what caused this bug to happen, but it fixed itself when you enter and exit a cutscene, so yeah. The music is really good. It's a mix of familiar Star Wars tunes combined with original material, and it really lives up to the Star Wars name. Anyway, at its core, The Force Unleashed is a hack and slash third-person action game with light RPG elements. You play as Starkiller, one of Darth Vader's secret apprentices, and throughout the course of the game, you'll cut and force your way through the galaxy, mowing down hundreds upon hundreds of stormtroopers and other Imperial soldiers, as well as commit a few small genocides against the indigenous population of several planets. Your primary weapon is, of course, your lightsaber, but you will also have access to a couple of different force powers as well. The combat system relies heavily on making various combos, and there are really a ton of these. You can simply cut someone up with a lightsaber, or you can also infuse that lightsaber with force lightning for extra damage. Or do an aerial slam attack. Or hold someone in the air and throw your lightsaber at them. On certain levels, you can even use the environment to your advantage by pushing people over the edge into endless pits or shoving them into explosive plants. The game will actively reward you for your creativity by giving you more force points, which is basically just XP. Each time you level up, you will get a point in 3 different categories: Force Powers, Force Talents, and Force Combos. Force Talents are basically just your primary stats like health and overall force energy. Force Power Points increase the stats of your Force Powers, and you unlock these as the game progresses, while combos are, well, you guessed it, these points unlock the aforementioned combos. When it comes to the actual Force Powers, you start off with a few basic ones like Push and Grip, but over the course of the game you'll unlock Force Lightning, Lightsaber Throw, Force Repulse, as well as a Lightning Shield. I mentioned before that the control scheme is surprisingly decent. By default, your Force powers are bound to Q for Force Lightning, E is for Force Push, and the right mouse button for Force Grip. By pressing R, you also enter this sorta defensive mode, and you can combine this with some of the aforementioned buttons for certain powers. For example, the lightning shield is R plus Q. And of course, any combo you can carry out is a combination of any of these buttons, and they are pretty intuitive as well. In my honest opinion, however, some powers and combos are definitely more powerful than others. You can absolutely shred through the majority of the enemy roster by dumping points into Force Lightning alone and using any lightning-based combo. There are very few enemy types that are immune to Force Lightning. And speaking of the enemy roster, you will fight pretty much everything the galaxy has to offer, from simple grunts and stormtroopers, over their more advanced variants with better weapons and equipment, all the way to the ATST walkers and some of the Emperor's Guard, which also serve as mini-bosses, but we'll talk about that later. Oh, we'll talk about the bosses. You will also fight the locals on various planets, and their fighting force ranges from common warriors to the mighty rancors. However, most of these baddies have a very basic AI, which often at times isn't even AI at all. Most will either just shoot at you or spam some melee attack. They are very prone to breaking, and you can easily cheese out some of the bigger ones by properly utilizing the environment. Their lack of intelligence is alleviated by their sheer numbers in certain areas, as well as the god-awful camera controls. When you're just moving through the level, for the most part, the camera is just fine. You might experience some odd close-ups here and there when you try to jump over certain platforms and whatnot. But the real problems begin when you try to use the in-game lock-on system. In 99.9% of the time, the camera will break in some way when you try to lock on a single enemy. It will either position itself in a weird angle or will forcefully lock itself up in the complete opposite direction of where your character is facing, if that makes sense. It renders the lock-on system utterly useless, which in turn makes Force Grip one of the most widely used force powers in the game and one of the core mechanics of the game extremely hard to use sometimes. You can play the game without using the lock-on system, however this will make you extremely inaccurate at times, as the game's auto-targeting system can fuck you over as well. This makes the entire game way harder than it actually is. Now, I've been playing on the Sith Warrior difficulty, which I assume is the normal difficulty, and I'm not kidding when I say that around 90% of my deaths occurred due to camera glitches. Basically, how this would go down is that I try to hit an enemy with a force power, or try to close in on them for a combo, the auto-targeting system kicks in, making me hit somebody else, then a melee enemy will knock me down, and since there is this animation that needs to play out for you getting up, which by the way takes way too long, all the enemies would just pile on you and wither down your health immediately. This makes the overall combat feel very tedious and not fun to play at all, which is a damn shame really, because in those few brief moments when the camera actually works and everything clicks, Force Unleashed can be pretty fucking awesome. Successfully chaining a couple of combos and absolutely obliterating a group of baddies with an aerial slam is insanely satisfying. The progression system is implemented really well, and you get access to new powers just in time when you start to get bored of using the old ones. As for upgrading your stats, you cannot rely on just earning XP through combat. You can find these force cubes scattered around the map, which give you either 10,000 XP or an extra point in any of these three categories. Through these cubes, you also find various crystals for your lightsaber. These crystals come in two forms, either a simple color crystal, or a crystal which enhances your attacks in a certain way. Furthermore, apart from these white cubes, you can also find certain single-time power-ups like invincibility or unlimited force energy. Usually there's around a dozen or so of these pickups per level, and even though the level design is almost entirely linear, some can be pretty easy to miss as they are put in hard to reach places, or you have a hard time jumping over to them because the fucking camera fucks you over. Now, speaking of level design, it's nothing to write home about really. In most of the levels, you'll move through these big and open environments, with an occasional enclosed space type level, like an Imperial ship. Essentially, you're moving from one encounter to the next, with certain objectives to throw in between to give off a sense of progression. And despite having a heavy linear design, I did manage to find myself wondering where to go next on maybe 2 or 3 occasions. Though I'm not sure if this was due to the fact that the path forward wasn't really clear enough, or just me losing all interest in playing after wrestling with the camera controls. If you guys didn't realize by now, I really fucking hate the camera in this game. Anyway, each level ends with a boss encounter, while some of the later levels have a mini-boss thrown in mid-level. These bosses are not particularly hard, and you already know by now what is the most likely thing to fuck you over and cause a death. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot, this game has quick time events. Every time you deplete a boss's health, you need to enter a quick time event, and sometimes the prompt will also appear for certain bigger enemies, though you don't have to enter the QT for these enemies. Now, these quick time event sequences aren't hard, but they are annoying as hell. They are completely unnecessary, they ruin the flow of the fight, and they are put in a really weird way, like they purposefully took the killing blow animation and just shoehorned in a couple of keyboard prompts to give a sense of interaction or something. Anyway, they're just awful. Okay, let's move on to the story finally. Who is Starkiller and why is he committing galaxy-wide war crimes? Warning, there will be spoilers ahead. As I already mentioned in the beginning, this game takes place between episodes 3 and 4, and at the time LucasArts wanted to further explore this time period, so much so that the Force Unleashed game was just one part of a bigger Force Unleashed project, which would include comics, books, etc. Of course, this all got canned after Disney bought out the Star Wars IP and replaced the existing EU with their own stuff. Now, I don't really know much about the current status of the EU. I mean, when people say Clone Wars, I instantly think of the OG Clone Wars, made by Genndy Tartakovsky, the creator of Samurai Jack. Anyway, after you finish the prologue with Vader on Kashyyyk, you defeat a Jedi and take away a child he's been hiding. This child grew up to be Starkiller, and in the first half of the game, you are Vader's secret apprentice. Vader's ultimate motive for taking you in is so he can train you to be strong enough for you two to take down the Emperor. This is in line of what we know about the Sith, and is a good reason why he keeps the secret from Palpatine. Your first mission is to board an Imperial ship currently being attacked by rebel forces led by General Kota, and since you are officially not part of the Empire, you get to slice both rebels and Imperial troops. Here you are also introduced to the mandatory droid plus witty pilot combo every piece of Star Wars media has to have. Luckily, Proxy the droid is a genuinely interesting and entertaining droid character, while Juno the pilot is alright. She's a standard blonde Imperial pilot with a British accent, who later becomes the love interest at a certain point in the game. So, the first couple of missions have you searching the galaxy for various remaining Jedi. After defeating Coda, you move on to Rex's Prime in search of another Jedi, while battling through various droids and other machinery brought back to life by the Force. The Jedi hiding here, Kazdan Paratus, has gone insane and recreated the Jedi Council using Jank. After you defeat him, you are again instructed by Vader to find yet another Jedi Master to defeat. I swear to God, the first half of The Force Unleashed is just you running around the galaxy like an errand boy. This time, you're off to Felucia to defeat Shaak Ti. Of course, in the meantime, Starkiller starts having doubts about his mission and loyalty to Vader. This is especially seen after Felucia, when Palpatine actually catches you with Vader, and Vader immediately stabs you in the back and throws you out into space, only to retrieve you minutes later and revive you?
The Emperor's fleet has arrived.
You have lured the Emperor to us. When do we strike?
I did not summon him. His spies followed you here. What is thy bidding, my master?
You have forgotten your place, Lord Vader. By taking this boy as your apprentice, you have betrayed me. Now you will kill him, or I will destroy you both.
Master, we can defeat him together.
Do it now, Lord Vader. Strike him down and prove your loyalty to me. Yes, kill him, Lord Vader.
Then he instructs you to try and assemble an army against the Emperor, so it provides a distraction for Vader. You then break out of an Imperial prison and rescue Juno, despite Vader's explicit orders to abandon your past, and this here represents the turning point in Starkiller's mind. You then go to the Cloud City of Bespin and realize that Coda is actually alive, albeit blind. You recruit him and he tells you that he has a contact among the Imperial Senate, but that he has been captured and held by the Empire. The contact is of course Senator Organa, and for the next couple of missions, you go back and forth to Kashyyyk and Felucia in an attempt to rescue both Princess Leia and her father. At this point, you're still technically on Vader's side, and Juno even walks in on you, finishing a conversation with Vader, and confronts you about it. Now, I must admit, the overall writing in this game is pretty damn good. It's much closer to the original trilogy in tone than to the prequels, if I were to compare it to the movies.
Thank you.
The plot is also helped out by excellent voice acting. Both the old and new characters sound really convincing and alive. The old characters especially have been utilized pretty well. They aren't just there for fan service, you know, for the audience to go all, "Whoa, I know that guy!" Anyway, one highlight of this part of the game is the mission when you have to take down a Star Destroyer in order to further break attention of the Emperor. Here your task is to first overload the accelerators so you can destroy the shipyard, but first you will have to fight Proxy, who by the way can actually take form of any character from the game, and he outright tells you that he has been instructed to kill you at a certain point. So after you fight him, he of course transforms into several different characters from both the game and the movies, including one special character from the prequel trilogy. And after you fight these several forms of him, you ultimately defeat him, and in the process you destroy his programming, thus freeing him. After you overload the accelerators, you use your Force Grip in order to take down a Star Destroyer. And while this sounds fucking awesome in concept, it is ultimately ruined by piss poor execution and an actual game-breaking bug. Now, for the most time, I didn't experience many crashes, maybe 2 or 3 at most, but you can actually get stuck in this fight because one of the prompts you need to press in order to bring down the destroyer can never show up, forcing you to restart the entire thing. Also, you're continuously attacked by TIE fighters, and you need to destroy them with Force Lightning, but we already know how the targeting system works here, don't we? Ultimately, you end up forming the Rebel Alliance with Organa, Coda, Leia and Mon Mothma, only for the ceremony to be ruined by Vader, who captures the Rebel leaders and tries to kill you for the last time. However, Proxy sacrifices himself and you are picked up by Juno. The final mission has you infiltrating the yet incomplete Death Star. You fight through to Vader, defeat him, and then you are given a choice. Either kill Vader and join Palpatine for the dark side ending, or attack Palpatine. Choosing to spare Vader nets you the light side ending, where you sacrifice yourself and allow the rebellion to live, while killing Vader has you failing to defeat the Emperor, who then just kills off everyone and takes you as his personal assassin. At least until he decides to replace you as well. All in all, the story and characters are pretty good, definitely one of the highlights of the entire game. I read up in an old review that it is the best story in the history of Star Wars video games. That is not true. However, what is here is pretty alright. You can also read up on the lore through databanks you unlock after completing each mission, and this is some neat stuff. The PC version also came with 3 bonus missions, and these are just more of the same really. The Coruscant mission has you discover something more about Starkiller's past, while Tatooine and Hoth missions are just blatant retconning of movie canon, where you kill Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi and force Luke onto the dark side. Finally, what else is there to say? The Force Unleashed truly could have been something special if it hadn't been for the god-awful camera problems and other issues. At first, I thought this might have been just a PC port problem, as the PC version was developed by Aspyr. However, looking at some old reviews, it would seem that there were similar problems on consoles as well. Nevertheless, this game sold well enough and even got a sequel, released 2 years later, and it was even worse. But that's a different video entirely. Now, would I recommend this game? Unless you're a huge Star Wars nerd, then no. No, I wouldn't. The frustration factor simply outweighs all the fun the game has to offer, and personally, I will probably never touch it again. However, if you don't mind losing some of your precious nerves, then by all means, go right ahead. Thanks for watching, hopefully I'll see you soon.